morning began with a kind of calm that made people believe nothing bad could possibly happen. Dawn stretched slowly over Amboseli National Park, washing the acacia trees in soft gold and painting long shadows across the savanna. For Ethan Wilder, a young park ranger barely 3 years into his service, this hour was sacred. It was the time when the world was quiet enough to hear your own heartbeat. When the lions were still waking, and when the air felt untouched by trouble. He often said sunrise was the closest thing the truth nature ever gave us. But on this particular morning, as he guided his jeep along a rocky ridge overlooking the plains, something about that truth felt fractured. Ethan had woken with a strange sense of anticipation, an unplaceable heaviness in his chest that didn't match the stillness of the world around him. He couldn't explain it, but it sat with him like an unfinished sentence. Every ranger learned to trust instincts, even the ones that seemed irrational. Today, his intuition whispered that peace was thinner than it looked. He slowed the jeep as he approached a familiar rock formation, one that served as a resting site for a local pride of lions. Ethan had spent countless hours observing them from a respectful distance, memorizing their personalities, recognizing their triumphs and wounds, and learning to read the subtle language of their movements. He believed every ranger carved out a small piece of the park to watch over. And these lions were his. He expected the pride to be asleep curled among the warm rocks. Instead, he found motion, small, quick, careless motion. A pair of young lions barely past cub age were chasing each other, dangerously close to the cliff edge. Their playful growls echoed across the ridge, each leap and pounce, kicking loose pebbles that clattered into the abyss below. At first, Ethan smiled. Playfulness meant health, confidence, safety, but the smile faded almost instantly. The cliff beneath them was notoriously unstable. Last month's rains had carved cracks along the edges, and rangers had marked the area for monitoring. The youngsters had no idea how fragile the rock beneath them was. As he reached for his binoculars, a soft tremor rolled through the ridge, so subtle he almost dismissed it. But he felt it again. A faint vibration, a small shift in the earth. Ethan lowered the binoculars slowly. Something wasn't right. He scanned the area looking for the older lions, especially the pride's dominant male. If danger approached, he would be the first to respond. But the adults were nowhere in sight. The youngsters had wandered too far out on their own, trusting a world that didn't always deserve that trust. A low breeze threaded through the air, brushing dust across the rocks. The atmosphere felt charged, as if the land itself was bracing for something it couldn't or wouldn't explain. Ethan leaned forward, elbows on the jeep wheel, watching every movement of the young lions with growing unease. It wasn't fear exactly. It was something quieter, deeper, a warning without words. He turned off the engine. The sudden silence made the world feel bigger, more exposed. He listened closely. Birds chattered in the distance. A few guinea fowls skewered over a patch of dry grass. Everything seemed normal, and yet his pulse wouldn't settle. The younger of the two lions pounced onto a slab of rock that jutted over the cliff at a precarious angle. The moment its paws hit the surface, Ethan heard a sound. He hoped he had imagined a faint crack. The kind of crack that rose from deep within stone. The kind that signaled a breaking point. He sat up straight. No, please, no. The lion jumped again, its playful weight landing near the fissure. Dust drifted upward. Small fragments of rock split off and fell into the void. The animal didn't notice. Why would it? It trusted the world the way only the young and untested do. Then the ridge trembled again, harder this time. Ethan's breath caught. Something inside him, instinct training, or something more primal, flared like a warning siren. He threw open the jeep door boots, hitting the ground harder than he intended. The air tasted sharper. His heartbeat thudded against his ribs. He took several steps toward the rock formation, eyes locked on the two lions. They paused in their play, both turning their heads toward him. For a moment, they stared unbothered, curious. He wasn't a threat. He never was. They knew his scent. They recognized his posture. He often spoke to them from afar, offering reassurance, even though he knew they couldn't understand the words. But now he didn't speak. He couldn't. He saw at the subtle shift beneath one lion's feet, a ripple along the rock face, a fracture widening like a slow gas from the earth. The world seemed to hold its breath. Ethan whispered, barely audible, "Get back, please." He took another step, knowing full well that getting closer wouldn't stop fate, but unable to stay still. The wind changed direction. The sun dimmed behind a thin veil of morning cloud. And then from somewhere he couldn't see a single lion's roar cut through the air. Sharp, urgent, unmistakable. The dominant male had sensed it, too, but the warning came too late. The rock gave way with a deep splitting sound that tore through the ridge. One of the young lions slipped its hind paws, skidding claws scraping desperately for hold. Its body slid toward the broken edge, a flash of golden fur against the dark abyss. Ethan lunged forward without thinking, the world narrowing to a single falling shape. In that instant, between the crumble of stone and the echo of the lion's cry, Ethan understood with chilling clarity. This morning was never meant to be ordinary. It was the morning everything would change. The moment the rock gave way, the world shattered into motion. Ethan didn't remember deciding to run. His body simply moved, driven by instinct sharper than thought. Dust exploded around the collapsing ledge as the young lion's paws scrambled desperately for grip. The cub's claws screeched across the stone, sparks of panic flashing in its amber eyes. Ethan skidded to the edge, heart pounding against his ribs like a trapped animal. For an instant he saw nothing but empty space and the swirling debris of what had been solid ground just seconds ago. Then he heard a low, desperate growl, thin and trembling. The young lion clung to a narrow outcropping halfway down the cliff, hind legs dangling over nothing, its body shaking violently from terror. The rest of the pride roared from a distance, sharp, frantic sounds that echoed through the ridge. The dominant male appeared on the crest of the rocks, his mane rippling in the rising wind. His eyes locked on Ethan with a look that wasn't threat, wasn't warning, but raw desperation. It was as if the king of this land was pleading with the only creature who might reach the falling cub in time. Ethan swallowed hard. Everything inside him screamed about the danger. One wrong step and he'd fall. One slip and the unstable rock beneath him could give way. Rangers were trained never to jeopardize their own lives recklessly. But this wasn't recklessness. This was a life hanging by a claw. He pressed his palm against the dirt, tested his weight, and edged closer to the precipice. Loose sediment crumbled under his boots. The cliff felt alive, trembling, protesting even the smallest disturbance. "Easy, easy," he whispered to the lion, though his own voice quivered. The cub cried out again, its claws scraping frantically. If it slipped just an inch more, it would drop straight into the jagged ravine below. Ethan forced himself to breathe. Air burned in his lungs. His mind raced through every protocol he had ever been taught, but none of them accounted for a rescue like this alone. Unprepared, with only seconds before the worst happened, he took a step back and sprinted to his jeep. His hands shook as he tore open the back compartment and fumbled for the emergency rope kit. The rope felt too thin, too insignificant for the weight of a lion. But it was all he had. He tied the first knot with trembling fingers. The second knot was steadier. By the third, his body remembered its training, working with rhythmic precision, even while fear hammered in his chest. Behind him, the pride continued roaring, agonized sounds that tore at the sky. The dominant male paced the rocky crest, glancing between Ethan and the trapped cub. The mother lioness appeared suddenly, her eyes blazing with terror and fury. She crouched low, tail flicking sharply, torn between instinct to defend her cub and the helplessness of being unable to reach it. Ethan knew he had seconds, maybe minutes, before the lioness's desperation overcame caution. He anchored the rope to a thick, twisted root embedded near the cliff's edge. He pulled hard once, twice, testing the strength. It held. He tied the free end around his waist. A small adrenaline-soaked laugh escaped him, not from amusement, but disbelief. He was about to descend a crumbling cliff to save a young lion. If anyone had told him this would happen when he woke up this morning, he would have laughed outright. But now there was no room for disbelief. Only the roar of a terrified animal and the sharp edge of time closing in. He lowered himself slowly, gripping rock ledges, feeling them shift beneath his fingers. Pebbles cascaded down past him, clinking off the stone before disappearing into the emptiness below. Sweat mixed with dust on his face. His knuckles scraped raw against sharp edges. Halfway down, the cub saw him and froze. Its eyes widened with both fear and recognition. Ethan had observed this pride countless times. He had spoken softly from afar. Never threatening, never intruding. Maybe, just maybe, the cub recognized the human who always kept his distance. Not a predator, not an enemy. The young lion whimpered, its claws slipping slightly. Ethan felt the jolt in his stomach as the cub's hind legs kicked into the void. "Hold on, just hold on," he shouted. Though he didn't know if the cub understood anything except terror. He reached it finally, positioning his boots on a narrow wedge of rock that barely supported him. He stretched his arm out inch by inch, trying to grab the lion without startling it. The cub growled weakly, body trembling violently. "Easy," Ethan whispered. "I've got you. Don't move." A fragment of stone cracked beneath his foot. The ledge tilted. His stomach lurched as his weight shifted dangerously. The rope dug into his waist with brutal force. He clung to the cliff with one hand, reached with the other, and finally grasped the lion's forehead. Warm fur slick with sweat, muscles tense as iron. The cub panicked and jerked away. "No, stay with me." Ethan tightened his grip. The cub roared a small, frightened sound that echoed like a plea. Above them, the dominant male answered with a booming call that vibrated through Ethan's bones. The lioness roared too, her cry breaking at the end, like a mother on the edge of losing everything. Ethan repositioned himself and pulled the cub closer. Its claws ran across his arm, tearing through fabric and skin. But he didn't let go. Pain shot through him hot and sharp. But he welcomed it. It meant he was still alive, still fighting. He hooked the rope around the lion's torso, securing the knot with trembling, mud-coated fingers. The lion whimpered, but didn't resist. Something in its eyes had shifted from panic to trust. Or perhaps the last flicker of hope a creature has when it senses someone fighting to save it. "Okay," Ethan breathed. "We're doing this together." He braced his legs, leaned back, and tugged on the rope twice, the signal for the automated winch system connected to his jeep. The rope tightened. The cub rose a few inches. The cliff groaned like a living thing. A rain of pebbles skittered past them. The rope strained. Ethan could feel every fiber screaming under the weight. Come on," he whispered through clenched teeth. The cub rose another foot. Dust exploded from a cracking fault in the stone. Then, with a sharp, thunderous crack, the ledge beneath Ethan's left foot collapsed entirely. He dropped, body swinging violently against the cliff wall. His shoulder slammed into the rock, sending pain through his entire side. The rope jerked, nearly tearing him free. Above, the cub was almost at the top. Only a few more feet. Ethan forced his hand up, grabbing the rope, pulling himself inch by inch. Despite the agony in his arm inside, he didn't care what it cost. The cub reached the edge. The dominant male stepped forward, gripping the rope in his teeth, pulling with primal strength. The lioness pushed from behind. Together, man and lions, they lifted the young one to safety. Ethan hung, suspended for a breathless moment, dizzy, exhausted, barely holding on. Then he felt the tension in the rope shift. Someone was pulling him up, slow, steady human hands. He closed his eyes as he ascended, trembling with the enormity of what had just happened. When he finally rolled onto solid ground, gasping, bleeding, shaking, he lifted his head toward the pride. The cub, safe now, stared back at him. And in that shared, fragile moment, something passed between them, a thread of connection woven not from fear or instinct, but from survival, trust, and the impossible rescue that had bound them together forever. Months passed, and the memory of the cliff rescue settled into Ethan's life like a quiet echo. Never loud, never intrusive, but always there, stirring at the edges of his thoughts. Whenever dawn broke over the savannah, the park returned to its natural rhythm. And so did he, moving through patrol routes, checking waterholes, documenting migrations, and teaching new rangers how to read the landscape with both logic and instinct. Yet something had changed within him. He carried the knowledge that somewhere out there in the maze of rock and grassland, a young lion was alive because of him, and an entire pride had witnessed the moment he chose their cub's life over his own safety. He never said it aloud, not even to his closest colleagues. But some small, quiet part of him wondered whether the lions ever thought about that day the way he did. He didn't expect anything from them. Animals lived in the present. Gratitude wasn't a currency they used the way humans did. Still, When he drove past the rocky ridges where the Pride often rested, he always slowed the jeep, scanning for a familiar young face among the golden forms sprawled in the sun. Most days he saw nothing. Some days he caught only a distant silhouette, and life, as it tends to do, kept moving. Then came the monsoon season. Storm clouds muscled across the sky like bruises spreading across the horizon. Winds swept through the grasslands. The air felt heavy, charged on the edge of something violent. Ethan felt it too. Attention. He couldn't name something coiling beneath the surface of the earth itself. He had been patrolling the northern boundary that morning, driving slowly because the rain had turned the dirt road into a slick ribbon of mud. The wipers slapped back and forth, failing to keep up with the relentless downpour. Water hammered the roof of the jeep, drowning out even the sounds of wildlife. This wasn't gentle rain. This was the kind that rearranged the world. Floods, collapses, broken trees, displaced animals. Rangers dreaded storms like this because they knew nature in distress demanded human intervention. And sometimes the cost was high. Ethan spotted a fallen acacia tree ahead, thinking it might have trapped an animal beneath its heavy branches. He stopped the jeep and stepped out into the storm. Water soaked him instantly, running down his face, blurring his vision. He approached the tree, kneeling to check the base and scanning for movement. Nothing. Just the harsh scent of wet bark and earth. He stood ready to return to the jeep when a faint rumbling sound shivered through the ground. At first, he thought it was thunder. Then it grew louder, a deep rolling growl, not from the sky, but from the earth itself. His eyes widened. A landslide. He turned just in time to see a wall of mud and debris hurtling toward him, ripping through the landscape like a living beast. He tried to run, but slipped the ground, turning to liquid beneath his boots. There was no escape. The wave of earth crashed into him with primal force, throwing him backward. He grabbed at anything, roots, branches, stones, but the surge swallowed him whole. Darkness pressed in, mud packed around his limbs. The world became small, suffocating, but a thin pocket of air formed near his face. A small miracle carved by chaos. He could breathe barely, though each inhale tasted of soil. He couldn't move his legs. The weight of the earth pinned him down like a giant hand. Panic surged through him, a wild animal clawing inside his chest. He forced himself to stay still. Panic would tighten the space around him. Slow breaths. Focus. Listen. The storm roared above like an angry god. But beneath that, something else. A faint rhythm. Footsteps. No, not footsteps. Something heavier. Something alive. Then came the sound that made Ethan's blood freeze. A roar, not distant, not lost in the storm. Directly above him. But it wasn't a roar of threat or challenge. It vibrated with urgency. A deep, resonant cry that seemed to search for something hidden beneath the mud. His heart stuttered. No, it couldn't be. The sound came again, louder. Closer. Something heavy moved across the surface above him. Scraping, shifting debris. Clumps of earth lifted. Pressure eased on his chest. A shadow passed over the thin sliver of light filtering through the cracks. A massive paw pressed down near his face. Claws digging into the ground. Pulling. Scraping. A lion. Not just any lion. He knew this presence the way one recognizes a familiar melody, even in the noise of a storm. The young lion, grown now larger, stronger, was digging for him. A disbelief so profound it nearly unraveled him. Swept through his mind. Lions avoided landslide zones. Lions did not search for buried humans. And yet here it was, tearing at the earth with furious determination. The scraping grew faster, more forceful. The lion grunted with effort, sending showers of dirt away from the mound that entombed Ethan. Then through the cracks, Ethan saw a clear flash of golden fur. He tried to shout, but only a hoarse whisper escaped. Still, somehow the lion heard him. Its head lifted. It roared not to him, but beyond him, calling out into the storm. Voices answered, human voices, shouts, footsteps, the rapid crunch of boots on wet mud. Light speared through the darkness as a rescue team broke through the surface. Hands reached for him, pulling him free from the earth. Air flooded his lungs in a gasp so sharp it felt like fire. The world swirled as they lifted him, mud dripping from his clothes, his hair, his eyelashes, and standing just behind the rescuers, massive, soaked, breathing hard. was the lion, the same lion whose life he had saved. Its mane, no longer the fluffy juvenile coat, but not yet the full crown of a king, clung to its muscular neck in wet strands. Its amber eyes locked with his. There was no fear in them, no aggression, only something quiet, ancient, profound, recognition, not instinct, not coincidence, something closer to choice. The rescuers stepped back cautiously, but the lion didn't move forward. It simply watched, chest rising and falling with the rhythm of exertion and rain. One ranger whispered, "Shaken Ethan, it led us here. We followed its tracks straight to you." Ethan couldn't speak, couldn't find a single word large enough to hold what he felt. The lion blinked slowly, lowering its head, not submissive, not dominant, something more like acknowledgement. Then it turned away. It didn't flee. It didn't hide. It simply walked into the storm with the calm of a creature who had done what it came to do. Ethan lay there, shivering, breath trembling in his chest. Nature had returned his favor. And in that moment, he understood something he would carry for the rest of his life. Some connections are not built through dominance or fear, nor through instinct alone. Some are forged in the moments when two lives hang by a thread, and both choose to pull the other back from the edge. The moment Ethan was lifted free from the suffocating debris, the world tilted around him in a haze of rain and blurred motion. His lungs burned from the sudden rush of air, and every limb throbbed with a dull ache of exhaustion and confinement. Voices surrounded him, his team shouting to check his pulse, secure his breathing, clear the mud from his mouth and nose. But none of it anchored him as firmly as the silent figure standing just beyond the human circle. The lion, the same one he had saved from the cliff months ago, the same animal he had thought about in quiet moments, wondering whether it had survived, wondering whether it remembered. And now here it was, a massive golden sentinel in the storm, its mane licked flat against its powerful neck, its amber eyes glowing with an intensity that no reader's manual could ever explain. Ethan could barely sit upright, yet his gaze stayed fixed on the lion as if tethered by something ancient and unspoken. The creature didn't pace, didn't growl, didn't display the restless agitation typical of lions near humans. It simply stood there, chest rising and falling in controlled breaths, watching him with a calm so deliberate it sent a chill through Ethan's already shivering body. The animal looked almost relieved. The rescuers kept a cautious distance, hands on tranquilizer rifles, but hesitant to use them, sensing that something extraordinary was unfolding, a moment in which instinct, logic, and everything they had been trained to expect no longer followed the rules. "Ethan, can you hear me?" one ranger said, gripping his shoulder. He nodded faintly, though his eyes never left the lion. "Don't scare him," he whispered hoarsely. "Scare him, as if the humans were the unpredictable ones here. As if the lion wasn't the legendary predator of the savannah." And yet the words made perfect sense. Ethan knew in a way he couldn't rationally defend that startling the lion would break something delicate. Something that had held long enough for the animal to lead the team directly to him. One of the senior rangers crouched beside Ethan, shouting over the rain, "We tracked his prints. They were deep, deliberate. He didn't wander. He walked straight to the landslide and refused to leave. He attacked the mud, clawing and roaring until we reached him. Ethan, I think he knew you were under there." The idea seemed too big to hold, too impossible, yet the evidence was standing a dozen feet away in the downpour, a living contradiction to everything textbooks claimed about lion behavior. Ethan tried to stand, but the moment he shifted weight onto his legs, they buckled. Two rangers caught him under the arms and steadied him. The lion took a single step forward, not aggressive, not probing, but purposeful, as if making sure he hadn't fallen again. The rescuers tensed instantly, raising their rifles. "Stop, Ethan," rasped his voice raw. "No weapons, please." His team hesitated. Rain hammered down on their helmets and jackets. The storm growled over the hills. The lion remained where it was, but its focus didn't waver. There was no tension in its muscles, no sign of preparing to lunge, only an unwavering vigilance that felt eerily similar to concern. Ethan lifted one trembling hand, palm open, not reaching out, not inviting, just acknowledging, and the lion responded, not with movement, but with stillness, a steadying calm that spread through the chaos like a warm current through cold water. One ranger whispered, "This is insane." Another murmured, No, this is something else. Lightning cracked in the distance, illuminating the landscape in white fire. For a brief second, the lion silhouette framed against the storm looked almost mythic, like a creature carved from the raw spirit of the savannah itself. Ethan swallowed hard, grounding himself. "We need to move," he said. The hillside could collapse again. The rescuers nodded, adjusting their stance to lift him. But as they tried to guide him toward the jeep, the lion stepped sideways, positioning itself not in their path, but parallel to them, mirroring the movement like a silent guardian escort. The team froze again. "Is he walking with us?" a ranger muttered. Ethan didn't answer. He didn't know how to answer. The lion wasn't stalking, wasn't circling, wasn't asserting dominance. It was accompanying them, matching their pace at a respectful distance, as if ensuring the route back to safety remained clear. Every few steps, the lion paused, scanned the ridge, then continued. It was behavior no one had seen before. Intentional, measured, purposeful. The storm had not eased. Sheets of rain blurred the world into shifting bands of gray. Mud clung to their boots, making each step a battle. The rescuers held Ethan between them, half carrying, half guiding him, and through all of it, the lion remained at their flank, unyielding. More than once, a ranger whispered, "Why isn't he leaving?" Ethan had no scientific explanation, only a feeling, quiet, intuitive, undeniable. The lion wasn't there out of curiosity, nor hunger, nor territorial instinct. It was there because something in its memory had chosen to stay. As they neared the ranger vehicles, headlights cut through the storm, painting the lion in a halo of pale light. The rain softened for a breath, and in that suspended moment, Ethan and the lion locked eyes once more. This was not the frantic gaze of a trapped animal, nor the weary stare of a predator weighing a threat. This was recognition, a shared memory forged on a cliff's edge months ago in the frantic heartbeat between life and death. Ethan felt something inside him settle, a truth he hadn't known he was waiting to understand. The rescue he had believed was a one-way act of compassion had become something larger. A loop completed not by human hands but by the very animal he had saved. The lion exhaled through its nose. A slow huff lost almost instantly to the rain. Then it stepped back, one deliberate stride then another, retreating into the darkness of the savannah. It did not flee. It did not hide. It simply faded, as if nature herself were reclaiming him with gentle hands. Ethan leaned heavily against the jeep, breath unsteady. The rescuers were silent, unable to voice what they had witnessed. Some moments were too enormous for language. Finally, someone whispered, "That wasn't instinct." Another replied, "That was something else entirely." Ethan didn't speak. He couldn't trust his voice not to break. But in the storm's fading growl, he understood something rare. Some rescues are not written by humans, nor guided by rules or science. Some are born of connection, raw, improbable, and unforgettable. He had pulled a lion from the edge of death, and today, against all odds, the lion had pulled him back. News travels quickly in the savannah, but among humans, it travels even faster. By the time Ethan arrived at the ranger station wrapped in blankets, Valine running into his arm, and a tremor still lingering in his voice, the story had already moved far beyond the boundaries of the national park. Radios crackled with disbelief. Phones buzzed with messages from distant offices. Senior officials demanded reports, interviews, photographs, footage, anything to help them understand how wild African lion had behaved in a way that defied everything textbooks had taught for a century. But Ethan was too tired to speak, too overwhelmed, too humbled. When the medical team finished with him, he stepped outside the tent to breathe fresh air. The storm had weakened into a gentle drizzle, and the savannah glistened beneath the filtered light of a sky finally catching its breath. In the distance, he could see the faint blurred outline of the ridge where everything had happened. The place where a lion had chosen to stand as his shield. "Are you sure you're ready to talk, Chief Ranger?" Daniel Hawk asked gently, standing beside him. Ethan nodded, though the weight of the moment pressed on his shoulders like the aftershock of a near-death awakening. But he wasn't ready to speak about the landslide, nor the terror, nor the suffocating darkness of being trapped beneath earth and debris. He wanted to talk about the moment the lion arrived. But how did one explain something like that? Even he didn't fully understand it. Over the next hours, ranger vehicles rolled in, Teams formed quiet semicircles around him, waiting, listening, as Ethan recounted the events: the cliff rescue months earlier, the familiar scar on the lion's shoulder, the unmistakable recognition in its amber eyes. A strange silence settled over the room. No skepticism, no laughter, just the profound stillness of people beginning to grasp a truth larger than logic. "It's like he remembered you," one ranger whispered. Ethan lowered his eyes, unsure how much he dared believe. "It wasn't just memory," he murmured. "It was intent. He didn't stumble onto me. He looked for me." The room didn't exhale for several seconds. When the sun broke through the clouds streaking gold across the land, a photographer from the wildlife department captured an image of Ethan standing outside the station. Mud still drying on his uniform cuts, still visible on his hands, exhaustion etched onto his face. And behind him, the vast savanna stretched open like a canvas painted by fate itself. It wasn't a dramatic photo. It wasn't theatrical, but it was real, raw, and human. It became the image that traveled the world. Within days, documentaries reached out. Biologists asked to review the case. Animal behaviorists challenged their own beliefs. Interviews flooded in. And yet, Ethan said yes to almost none of them. He didn't want fame. He didn't want attention. He wanted quietly and privately to understand why a lion had risked its own life to dig through mud and debris for a human being. Why that lion? Why him? As the weeks passed, Ethan returned to duty. His injuries healed, though the emotional weight lingered like a second shadow. And slowly, almost imperceptibly at first, he began to notice a pattern. Every few days when he patrolled near the open plains, he saw a figure in the tall grass, a golden silhouette against the sun, watching, but never approaching too closely. It was him, the lion. He no longer avoided humans, no longer slipped away at the first sign of a vehicle. Instead, he held his ground regal and steady, as if ensuring Ethan could see him. As if some invisible thread still linked the two. Sometimes it was a simple glance exchanged across distance. Sometimes it was the lion lifting his head and exhaling in a slow measured breath the same way he had done moments before stepping back into the storm that day. And each time Ethan felt that same pull in his chest. A bond that wasn't based on ownership training or domestication. Something older, something innate. A bond born from survival. A bond forged in moments when death had hovered close enough to taste. The world called the lion a hero. Scientists argued over whether animals could feel gratitude, empathy, or loyalty, but Ethan didn't need research papers or televised debates to explain what he had witnessed. He had seen it in the lion's eyes. Not submission, not instinct, recognition, and perhaps something astonishingly close to friendship. Months later, the park received an influx of visitors. Tourists, hoping to catch a glimpse of the lion who saved a man. But Ethan kept people at a respectful distance, afraid that human curiosity would disturb something sacred. The lion wasn't a spectacle. He wasn't a story for entertainment. He was a life, a soul, a being whose actions had rewritten the borders between species. One sunset, as Ethan stood atop the same cliff where their connection had first begun, he saw the lion once more. The sky burned orange, the wind hummed low through the grass, and the lion walked to the ridge with slow, deliberate steps, not threatening, not fearful, simply present. He looked at Ethan, and Ethan looked back. Neither of them moving closer, neither stepping away. The kind of moment that didn't need sound or words or human interpretation. A moment that said, "We survived, both of us, and we remember." In that quiet meeting of two lives that should have never intertwined, Ethan understood something profound. Sometimes the wild chooses you. Sometimes compassion echoes louder than instinct. And sometimes the bond that shocks the world begins with a single act of kindness repaid in a way no one could have imagined. In the end, when all the dust settles, the cliff rescue, the landslide, the impossible reunion between a man and a lion, what remains is not just the thrill of survival or the shock of witnessing a wild animal behave in a way few believe possible. What remains is a lesson, a quiet, powerful truth about who we are, what we value, and how even the smallest act of compassion can ripple outward into something far bigger than we ever imagine. Ethan did not save that lion months earlier because it was heroic to do so. He didn't have time to think about cameras, praise, or recognition. He acted because something inside him refused to let another living being fall when he had the chance to pull it back up. That moment, just a few minutes of effort, courage, and hope is what rewrote the rest of the story. And maybe that's the heart of it. Great stories rarely begin with grand gestures. They begin with a single choice to care. When Ethan reached that cliff edge, he didn't just save a lion. He cast a vote for kindness in a world where fear often speaks louder. But nature has a way of remembering what the world forgets. It has a way of answering compassion with compassion, bravery with bravery, and life with life. Months later, when Ethan himself lay trapped beneath the earth, gasping for breath, moments away from disappearing into silence, it was the same lion, now strong, healthy, and free, who returned the favor, not by accident, not by instinct alone, but because something in that earlier moment had woven a thread between them. A thread strong enough to pull a man back from death. Many will look at this story and debate what truly happened. Scientists may call it imprinting, recognition, conditioning, or coincidence. Others may say the lion simply followed unusual sounds or movements in the mud. But those who understand life, not just biologically, but emotionally, know that sometimes the heart recognizes what the mind cannot explain. Because this story isn't really about a lion and a ranger. It's about connection, about empathy, about the surprising truth that compassion crosses every boundary we have ever drawn between species. It's about remembering that we share this world, and every act of kindness reminds it that we are capable of being more than we were yesterday. Ethan's bond with the lion didn't make him a hero. It made him human, and it made the lion something we often underestimate in the wild of being capable of memory, gratitude, and choice. And perhaps the greatest lesson is this: when you step into the world with compassion, you never walk alone. Something always walks with you, seen or unseen. Because kindness never disappears, it waits for its moment to return. As we close this story, let it stay with you the next time you hesitate to help. The next time you wonder if small actions matter. Ethan didn't know the lion would one day save his life. He didn't help because he expected anything in return. He helped because it was right. And sometimes doing what's right becomes the beginning of a miracle. If this story moved you, if it reminded you of the beauty, mystery, and wonder that still exists between humans and the wild, then I invite you to stay with us on this journey. Subscribe to the channel, support our work, and allow these powerful stories to keep flowing. Your support gives us the strength to create more unforgettable content stories that inspire, uplift, and remind us that compassion can change the world. Thank you for being here.